Let's talk about the main takeaways for Syracuse basketball's 2024-25 ACC schedule.
You are Locked On Syracuse, your daily podcast on the Syracuse Orange. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome into Locked On Syracuse. I'm Jackson Holzer, and thank you for making us your first listen of every single day here on the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day, and we're free and available wherever you get your podcasts. And on today's show, we are going over the main takeaways for Syracuse basketball's upcoming ACC schedule. Yesterday, we talked about the non-conference games and what they need to accomplish in that. So today, we're going to the conference. Today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. That's why LinkedIn Jobs helps find the right people for your team faster and for free. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions apply. All right, so let's get into the takeaways for Syracuse men's basketball's ACC schedule for next season. But before we do that, I want to run by the schedule with you in case you are not aware. So the home games next year for the Orange are Duke, Georgia Tech, Louisville, North Carolina, NC State, Virginia, and Wake Forest. Those are the teams that they're only going to be playing at home next season. The road-only games, so they're going to play these teams once, only on the road. Cal, Clemson, Florida State, Miami, SMU, Stanford, and Virginia Tech. And the three teams that Syracuse is going to be playing both home and on the road for next season, Boston College, Notre Dame, and Pitt. That is the ACC schedule for Syracuse basketball next season. Let's get into the takeaways. And the first one is the tough teams for Syracuse are at home. And this is massive for the Orange. The three teams that I'm talking about are Duke, North Carolina, and Virginia. Let's start off with Duke, okay? You don't need me to tell you how good Duke is at basketball. You don't. You know it by now, right? And if you don't, you can look it up. They're pretty good. Last year, they were in the Elite Eight, and I think most fans of them would consider that basically a failure. They're one of the only schools that can get to the Elite Eight, and you would kind of classify it as a failure for them. Like, if Syracuse got to the Elite Eight, would you be saying it's a failure for the Orange next season? I think we'd be thrilled if they made the Elite Eight. Oh my goodness, it'd be like they actually won the national championship if Syracuse got to the Elite Eight next season now. I know in past years, the expectation was a national championship, but in terms of next season, you get the idea, right? Syracuse has played Duke 8 times on the road since 2014, which was the year that Syracuse got into the ACC, and they've won at Duke twice. So that's 2-6, which isn't actually that terrible. 2-6 at Duke. You can easily be 0-8, 1-7. But regardless, you get Duke at home this year, not on the road. I think we take that, right? It's a little bit easier. They won their first year, or in 2016 and 2019 is when Syracuse beat Duke in the ACC. Remember, Elijah Hughes had that full court shot in 2019. It was pretty crazy. It was at the end of the first half. Duke is the best player in the country coming in at Cooper Flagg. They also have the best commit class in the country overall. Obviously, they have Malik Brown now, and Malik Brown probably won't play a substantial role for them. That's how deep and talented this Duke team is. It's good to get them at home, because going on the road and beating the Blue Devils next season, probably not likely. Home, it definitely boosts their chances. Next up is North Carolina. Syracuse has never won in Chapel Hill. They've never won in Chapel Hill, and not only have they never won in Chapel Hill, they very rarely keep it close. In 7 games in Chapel Hill, Syracuse loses by an average of 13 points per game. Let that sink in for a second. When they play North Carolina on the road, in those 7 tries, they lose by an average of 13 points. So very rarely is it an even close contest. It's one thing to lose at North Carolina. I think most teams do lose at North Carolina. That shouldn't hurt you all that much. But if you get blown out, that does hurt you. You can't get blown out. That's one of the keys to making the tournament. Don't get blown out. And Syracuse Oftentimes when they go to North Carolina, they lose by a lot. They did go to overtime in 2022. Cole Swider had a great game. He had, 36 points. It was his best game in a Syracuse uniform, and they still lost. It's just like they can't win there. They get them at home. And to further illustrate the importance of having North Carolina at home next season, last year they lost by 36 on the road. They lost at North Carolina by 36 points. Not long after, Syracuse faced North Carolina, the same North Carolina team that had just beaten them by 36, with no injuries, really. All their players were playing. They didn't get a lucky break that, RJ Davis was out, which, by the way, he's back for North Carolina next season, a consensus All-American. Armando Bacot was playing. They're all playing. All the horses are in the lineup for North Carolina. And Syracuse beat them at home. Let that sink in. They lost by 36 at North Carolina. And about a month later, they beat that same team at home. And I think they beat them by 7. So that's a 43-point turnaround, home versus the road. It's pretty important that Syracuse has North Carolina at home and not on the road for next season. So once again, one of the takeaways is Syracuse having the tough teams in the ACC at home for next season. And the third team that I want to illustrate, and this team doesn't really have as many expectations as the other two, right? Duke is projected to be a top 10 team. North Carolina projected to be a top 10 team. Virginia, not so much. They're probably on the bubble for next season. They really don't have the greatest roster in the world. But when Syracuse goes to Virginia, it's usually not very good. They really struggle. And Virginia has been a powerhouse team over the years, even though they are very much boom or bust in the tournament. Regular season standpoint, this team usually wins a lot of games. Oftentimes, they will exceed expectations. You won't think North Carolina or you won't think Virginia will be that good going into the year, and then they end up being pretty good. Could be one of those situations. Last year, they lost by 22 at Virginia. It wasn't really close. They haven't broken 70 points against Virginia since 2009. That's home and the road. They don't even really score against Virginia in that defense, the pack line defense that everyone obsesses about. And it works. Syracuse can't really score on Virginia. No one really can, to be honest with you. They are 2-6 lifetime at Virginia. They beat them in 2020, which was the last time that Syracuse beat a ranked team on the road. But overall, you have Virginia this year at home. Makes it much more manageable for the Orange next season. So, the overarching takeaway for Syracuse basketball's ACC schedule, or at least one of them, is that the Orange have the tough teams. Duke, North Carolina, and Virginia, typically the three powerhouses of the ACC, places where Syracuse does not typically do well in. They have them all at home for next season. They do not have to go on the road to face those teams. Now, coming up, yes, it's nice that they don't have to play those teams, but Syracuse is going to be on the airplane a lot. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. And LinkedIn is a tool that I use all the time to find the latest job opportunities. But LinkedIn isn't just a job board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job, but might be open to the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. LinkedIn knows that small businesses are wearing so many hats and might not have the time or resources to hire. LinkedIn is constantly finding ways to make the process easier. They even just launched a feature that helps you write job descriptions, making the process even easier and quicker. 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the streaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube, where the free Amazon Fire TV channel's at. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Welcome back, everyone, in Locked On Syracuse. I'm Jackson Holzer, and on today's show, we are going over the main takeaways for Syracuse basketball's 2024-25 conference schedule. Yesterday, we did the non-conference games. Today, we are doing ACC play. We went over how the tough teams for the Orange next year, that's Duke, North Carolina, and Virginia, are at home for next season, which is good for the Orange. But now let's discuss the travel. It's a talking point for sure. The travel is definitely, how should I say it, worse than in years prior, and that's because of the recent ACC expansion. You got two teams from California coming in, SMU from Dallas coming in. Those are not on the Atlantic coast, but it's just the way it is now with conference realignment. Syracuse is one of the 6 teams in the ACC next season that are going to have to face Cal and Stanford on the road. The other 5 teams are Boston College, Florida State, Miami, Virginia, and Virginia Tech. I imagine that the way the ACC is going to do it is that for those teams that have to play Cal and Stanford, it's going to be one of those scenarios where you do the flight once, you play one of the teams on a Tuesday, and you play the other team on a Saturday. So you don't have to do it multiple times. Like, I can't imagine Syracuse plays Cal in January and then Stanford in February, like 3 weeks apart. I just can't see that happening. I think they're just going to give everyone a break and say a week-long trip to California. I think that's how they do it, but nothing's official yet. That's just how I see it coming. Regardless, though, it's manageable. The reason why it's manageable is less so because of the travel and more so because of the teams that Syracuse is going to face. Neither Cal or Stanford project to really be that great next season. They just don't. That's a stretch where they could easily go 2-0, maybe 1-1, but at the very, they shouldn't go 0-2 in those games. They should be able to at least beat one of them because neither have high expectations for next year. And be honest with you, use the flight as a team bonding experience if you really want. It's about 5-6 hours, Syracuse to California. It's not terrible. It's a 3-hour time difference, but it's behind, so it makes that a little bit easier. Put it this way. It's a lot easier to go from Syracuse to California than it is to go from Syracuse to Hawaii, which the Orange had to do last year for the Maui Invitational. You can watch movies, read some books, watch game film, whatever you want. Use it as team building, whatever you want to do. It shouldn't be that much of a hindrance that Syracuse has to play California teams twice for next year. Even if the ACC makes it so that they have to do the trip twice. Even if they have to do it twice, it shouldn't be used as an excuse for this team next year. Cal and Stanford don't project to be that great for next season, so it's certainly manageable. The Orange are also going to have to go to Dallas because they're facing SMU next season. That's not super bad. Syracuse to Dallas is not a super duper long flight. I don't know exactly how much it is, but it can't be that long. SMU also doesn't project to be that good. That's a game that you can win. Going to Dallas, facing SMU. It's a winnable game right there. The toughest part, honestly, is the fact that Syracuse has to go to Florida twice. They got to face Florida State and Miami next season. And that's one of those trips where you can do that multiple times. But I mean, it's not like going to California where it's such a long flight and everything like that. Florida State and Miami, those aren't terribly long from Syracuse. You can do that trip more than once. And it's a super long bus ride going from Miami to Tallahassee. It's like 8 hours. I've done it before. It's long. You can also get on a flight, but still you're flying across the state of Florida or down the state of Florida. You can do that multiple times. Regardless, Florida State and Miami, I don't really think Florida State's that great for next season, but Miami could be a tough game. Miami was one of those teams that a lot of people were looking at for next season as being a top 25 team, easily making March Madness next year. They were basically everyone's rebound team. They were a team that failed to meet expectations last year, obviously. But then Norchad Omier entered the transfer portal basically at the last moment. It was pretty late when he entered it. He's like Miami's best player. And he transferred to Baylor. So now expectations for Miami have drastically changed. They're a team that might project to be on the bubble for next season. overall, I think a reasonable expectation for those 5 games. So 2 California teams, SMU, Florida State. The reasonable expectation is that Syracuse goes 3-2. That's what it is. I know it's tough to win on the road, but you can split in Florida. You can beat SMU, and you could easily go 2-0 against those California teams, or 1-1. That's what I think. It shouldn't be that difficult, even though the travel is a little bit more than usual, a lot of air miles. And if I had to choose between lots of travel but manageable teams, or not as much travel but tougher teams, I would pick more travel, easier competition. That's what I do. That's what I would do. Leave a comment below what you would do. Would you rather face Duke, North Carolina, Virginia on the road, but get those other teams at home? Or what it is currently, Duke, North Carolina, Virginia at home, but you got to go to California, play Cal, Stanford, Miami, Florida State. So you're going to Florida too, and Dallas. Which one would you rather? I would prefer having the tough teams at home and facing maybe the easier competition on the road. That's what I prefer. So even though Syracuse is going to have to travel a lot for next season, I don't think that should be a huge hindrance on the Orange. And by the way, I know I say 3-2, but expectations can change. If this team does really, really well in non-conference next year and they start rattling off some wins in ACC play, 4-1 might become a reasonable expectation. Or perhaps Cal and Stanford overachieve and all of a sudden maybe 2-3 isn't so bad. Regardless, I think right now on June 17th, 3-2 in those 5 games is a reasonable expectation for this team next season. Now, coming up, I'm going to talk about the home and road advantage. What I mean by that is the teams that Syracuse has to face both home and on the road for next year aren't so bad. Summertime means baseball, the NBA Finals, and more, and you can bet it all on FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 you can use to bet everything from the Finals MVP to who's going to hit one out of the park. And right now, the Boston Celtics are up 3-1 in the series in the NBA Finals against the Dallas Mavericks. Boston is minus 3,500 to win the finals at this point. If you believe in Dallas, they are plus 1,400. Dallas would have to do something that's never been done in the history of the NBA, which has come back from a 3-0 series deficit. In hockey, it has happened. The Oilers down 3-0 right now, so there is precedent there for a team coming back from 3-0. But in the NBA, not so much. I think it's going to end tonight. I think Boston's going to handle Dallas tonight and win their first NBA championship since 2008. So good on them for that. But still, you want to bet Boston minus 3,500. You want to bet Dallas plus 1,400. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and add a big win to your summer bucket list. FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app. Welcome back, everyone, into Locked On Syracuse. I'm Jackson Holzer. On today's show, we are going over the main takeaways for Syracuse basketball's ACC schedule for next season. I discussed how the tough teams, which is Duke, North Carolina, Virginia, are at home for next year, which is really nice. There's going to be a lot of travel, right? You're going to have to face the California teams, both of them, Cal and Stanford. You're going to Dallas to play SMU, and you got to go to Florida twice to play Florida State and Miami. But overall, it's pretty manageable given that the teams that they're projected to play or that they will play aren't projected to be that good for next season. And now let's talk about the home and away advantage, which is the fact that the teams Syracuse are going to face both home and on the road are not the greatest, which works in Syracuse's favor. First up, well, before I get to each team, I'll tell you the 3 teams that they are facing, which is Boston College, home and road, Notre Dame, home and road, and Pitt, home and road. That's 6 games total. Let's start with Boston College, shall we? This is a team that Syracuse dominates year in and year out. Just to be completely frank, right? There's teams that Syracuse struggles against, and there are teams that Syracuse appears to have a number on, and one of them is Boston College. Since moving to the ACC, which was in 2013-14, Syracuse has lost just 4 times to Boston College, and only one of those were at home. 3 times on the road, including last season. They historically dominate Boston College. Boston College does not project to be a very good team next season. 24/7 Sports, I looked this up, has them as the 86th best commit class in the country. So it's not like Boston College is bringing anyone really that great in. Of course, you can take rankings with a grain of salt, but at the same time, 86th, not very good. Boston College is not projected to be very good next season. Not a tournament team, in my opinion. So getting them home and on the road, that's an advantage for Syracuse right there. Next up, let's go to Notre Dame. Notre Dame is one of those hit or miss teams on any given season. Some years they're really good. Some years they're not. Last year they were not very good, even though Syracuse nearly blew, a 30-point lead in the Dome on Jim Boeheim Day to them. But since moving to the ACC, similar to Boston College, the Orange have only lost to Notre Dame 4 times. 2 of them have come at home, 2 of them on the road. Notre Dame has a top 50 commit class coming in. I think they were 49th to be exact, but still not projected to be a tournament team for next year. That's already 2 teams that they're going to have both home and on the road, not expected to be in the dance for next year. That's good. Finally, there's Pitt, and Pitt is a team that Syracuse has struggled against in past years. But at the same time, the Orange did sweep Pitt last year, which was one of the reasons why Pitt didn't make the tournament. They swept them last year. This is definitely the toughest of the home and road teams for next year. They are more like a bubble team. I believe when Joe Lunardi released his bracketology, they were a 10 seed, which is right on the bubble. Pitt has the 77th best commit class coming in, which isn't great, but they still retain some guys. So they are definitely the toughest. But if that is your toughest home and road team for next season, you're in pretty good shape. So overall, the 3 teams that they're playing, Boston College, Notre Dame, and Pitt, both home and on the road, that's 6 total games. The reasonable expectation for Syracuse against those games, in those games next year, is 4-2. That's the minimum. You got to go at least 4-2. Maybe even 5-1. I'm not expecting 6-0. To have not one loss in there, I think would be tough, especially because that's 3 road games. It's tougher to win on the road than it is at home. But I think 4-2 minimum, 5-1 would be nice for this team. They could sweep Boston College. They can sweep Notre Dame. Pitt, they might split against next year. That would be tough. I wouldn't write it as an auto loss in either way against Pitt, but still that's the team they're most likely to split with. Again, 4-2, 5-1 in those games. I think overall, when you're looking at an ACC record prediction for this team next year, I would say if you are combining the 5 travel games from last segment and the 6 home and away games that they're going to play for a total of 11, I think 7-4 is pretty reasonable. Maybe 8-3, but 7-4 would be nice. I'd take 7-4. And then Duke, Carolina, Virginia, 1-2. 1-2 is more than fine. Just don't go 0-3 in those games. The win that they're most likely to get is probably Virginia. If they can keep it close with Duke and Carolina, that won't hurt them in the net. So in the 5 travel games, the 6 home and road games, and the 3 teams that I mentioned, I think a fair expectation for them next year is 9-6. And that's 15 games, or that's 8-6, actually. 8-6, I want to say. That means there are 6 games remaining. That's Georgia Tech at home, Louisville at home, NC State at home, Wake at home, Clemson away, and Virginia Tech away as well. If they split those remaining 6, then the Orange next year would be 11-9 in the ACC. So once again, I think they are probably going to be similar in terms of ACC record. One of the reasons, though, that wasn't enough last year wasn't that their record was bad. It was the margin of defeat. They got blown out in a lot of games, and when they won, they didn't win by a lot. So the goal, if you have a similar record, 11-9, 12-8, even 13-7 would be terrific. Don't get blown out. And of the teams that you are supposed to beat them good. No more going on the road, playing Louisville, and beating Louisville by 4 points. I don't even think they don't face Louisville on the road this year, but you get the idea. Louisville, by the way, one of those teams who are probably going to be much better next season. I think next year you're looking at probably 11-9 in the ACC. 12-8 would be nice. 13-7 would be terrific. But again, another over 500 season in conference play. I project Syracuse for next year. So that is it for today's podcast. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. If you like this video, click that like button. And if you really liked it, subscribe to the channel and turn on those notifications so you know right away when I'm dropping the next podcast. Yesterday, we went over the takeaways from the non-conference games. Today, we did the conference games for next year. And tomorrow, overall schedule takeaways for the Orange next year and what I project Syracuse to win, just looking at every single opponent for next season. Take care, everyone.